This is the State of the Property Market for UK Lawyers, episode number 4. Today is the 1st of May and everything seems to be going well in the property market, and our show is getting more and more viewers, and thank you very much. Remember to like and subscribe as you go along, and hopefully we'll get more viewers as we go throughout the year. The good news is the property market seems to be going really, really well. Okay, I am delighted to welcome today our guest, Anthony Codling. For those of you who've met Anthony before or seen Anthony before, he's an economist, currently working at the Royal Bank of Canada, and he has a unique insight into the property market, been working in it for 20 years, I think, Anthony, or thereabouts, nodding at me. Okay, so a big thank you, as always, to 20 Convey, who provide the data for a lot of what we show you today, and an equally big thank you to Chris Watkins, who provides some of the graphics for the at the start of this show. And he has his own show, a brilliant show, mainly aimed at estate agents, out every Friday, and I highly recommend people to watch the Chris Watkins show on a Friday morning. So without further ado, I'll get onto our first slides and introduce you to Anthony. Anthony, hello, welcome.
Yeah, morning Richard, morning everyone.
Right. Okay, so we'll get straight stuck into it, and here we go. So this week, ending 21st of April, you can see that the number of listings coming to the market was up yet again. 553,000 listings in week 16, and that is probably 10% higher thereabouts than last year at the same time, and higher than any year in the last 7. Anthony, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's positive news, isn't it? Especially, everyone talked about last year being really tough because of, the implications and the ramifications of the mini budget in autumn 22. But even last year, you can see that we had more listings than 22. And so to be up again, I think that's very positive news. That shows that people are keen to get on a move, and it ties in what the house builders are saying. So we had a load of trading updates, so where the house builders report to the stock market over the last couple of weeks, and that kind of ties in what they're saying, in that they're seeing good levels of visitors on site, the quality of leads is very good, and their sales rates are back to normal levels. So it seems to be what's actually happening in the market is very different to what you read in some of the newspapers.
Yeah, I've seen some normal headline grabbing stuff this morning from the BBC about house prices going down, but of course that's all old data. This webcast is aimed at lawyers, and for all you lawyers out there who are watching, why are you interested in the number of houses coming on the market? Well, the answer is simple. The market, somebody putting the house on the market today, on average will sell in 3 months, and that will, in 3 months' time, you will know how many you will start to receive memorandums of sale dropping on your desks. So this is a almost perfect crystal ball to see exactly how many jobs are going to be coming your way in 3 months' time. And we follow that through to sales subject to contract and then exchanges. In effect, you're getting an idea of how much money you're going to be getting in the bank about 9 months down the line. So we'll follow this through. Next slide. This is the national weekly listings with the whole graph and how they've followed through this year so far. And as you can see, the big thick white line is about 20% up on the pink line being 2023, and then the white lines followed it almost perfectly, 20% above. And indeed, the white line is higher than 2019, 2018 and 2017. And then you can see that we've just had this big dip. That big dip that we've just experienced was the Easter break. And then there's a couple more dips to come, which are around the bank holidays. We've got May bank holiday, which is just coming up to, and then the Whitsun bank holiday in a month's time. So you'll see those dips. But the main thing is that we are following very smoothly the lines for listings in the previous years. Anthony?
Yeah, again, I think it's that bodes well, isn't it? That we talk about being a spring selling season in the housing market, and that the way that line goes up from the bottom left kind of shoots up in early spring and then kind of maintains that. I always think it's interesting, isn't it? You think that maybe on the bank holiday weekends, it's a good weekend for house hunting and making offers, but the graph shows otherwise, doesn't it? Big
It does.
dips when we get bank holiday weekends. People start getting out in their gardens and doing nice stuff outside.
Don't bother putting your house on the market. I think it's just 4-day weeks as much as anything, isn't it? Everyone's busy. Okay, moving on. So the key element here for me, as we show this graph every week, and we've updated it here from last month, is that supply and demand, as in all economic markets, are the most important factors, or it's two of the most important factors. So what we've got here is a supply side issue. Total houses for sale at this point are 654,000. That compares to where we were in 2023 of 585,000. That looks like a big rise, Anthony.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? Absolutely huge rise to where we were. And if we think back this time in 2023, many forecasters, including myself, beginning of last year, were saying house prices were going to fall kind of 8 to 10%. We had
some predicting 30 there, weren't there?
Yeah, there were. I believe that person still is forecasting a 30% drop. And we're also in the kind of the jaws of the kind of cost of living. So we saw really high inflation at kind of this time last year. That was putting people moving plans on hold. And we're also again still seeing then the kind of the higher rates following the turmoil following the mini budget. So yeah, a really good recovery since this time last year.
But it's not too many. And the point we're trying to show on this slide is that at the point where just after COVID, where there was very few houses coming on the market, it was 360,000 houses on the market. What happens then, of course, is not enough supply, loads of demand, up go the prices. But you only get prices coming down when there's too many properties on the market. So if we go back to the real big dip, which was in 2008, there were 1.4 million. So there's a massive long way to go between 654,000 today and the 1.4 million that we were back in 2008. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really, really interesting that 1.4 million there in March 2008, and if we look at how many housing transactions there were in 2008, I think it was 690,000. So in March, almost had twice the number of homes on the market that were actually sold in the year. So that's clearly, supply outweighing demand, and that's when we saw, house prices fall. House prices fell almost 20% from their peak in August 07 to their trough in kind of March, April 09. So yeah, that was.
Aren't we? You've got a graph to show us that later. Okay, so this is sort of like a Goldilocks zone. I don't know how much higher this Goldilocks zone needs to go. It probably could go to 750 or maybe 800, but we are in the not too many, not too hot, not too cold, and therefore prices should remain relatively stable at the moment. So moving on, we then come to how many sales were agreed. So we know how many houses have come on the market, but of those houses, how many sales have been agreed? And again, we've got a graph that shows a whole year. The white line is this year to date. And again, you can see the same scenario with 2024 being significantly better than any of the previous years, apart from the 2 COVID years, which we're not showing here. Okay, so just comparing to the pink line of 2023, you can see it's remained consistently about 20% above. I would just keep an eye on this though. If you look at the last week or two, the distance between the pink line and the white line seems to have narrowed a little. I'm not saying that that's going to continue and that things are getting worse, but there does seem to be a narrowing of those two lines. Anthony?
Yeah, if we look at what's actually happening in the market, so far this year, we've seen a few of the several of the larger lenders, building societies and banks, tweaking up mortgage rates, and that's in response to economists like myself thinking that it's going to take longer for the Bank of England to start cutting bank rate, and so that's putting a slight dampener on the kind of sale agreeds at the moment, and so it's making it slightly more difficult to secure a mortgage kind of if you're at that stage now than it would have been 2, 3, 4 weeks ago.
Okay, rattling through then. How many houses came on last week sold subject to contract? Again, you can see this is sort of giving us the same view in a different way, really. 27,000 houses were sold subject to contract last week. And this is so bang up to date data. I really can't thank Chris and 20A enough for this, but you can see that that's again 10% above the previous year, 10% on 2022, way below where we were in 2021. Of course, nothing happened in COVID. We were all locked down and sat in our homes with nothing to do in 2020 at this point in time, but massively above where we were in 19, 18 and 17. What do you think to that? I mean, that's a long way up, isn't it, for this particular week?
That's really interesting. I mean, obviously, the 2021 we had the kind of the stamp duty holiday rush. Obviously, 2020 essentially the housing market was pretty much shut, wasn't it? But yeah, to see that, even if you compare it with the 2017, 18, 19, which we would have said is a normal market, unbelievably stable actually from 2016, 17, 18, 19.
With this,
so
sorry, go on.
No. Yeah. So the fact we're higher than that, with the economic headwinds, with the higher interest rates, is people talk about the housing market suffering, but the data suggests it's in actually pretty good health.
I think there was a headline this morning on the BBC saying that I think it's nationwide perhaps have said there's been a drop in house prices, but it's really important to know that data's old. Those are completions that took place in the last quarter, and those deals were agreed 6 months prior to that. So this is much more accurate, up to date, what is happening on the ground. We'll try and rattle through these because we've got a lot of stuff to get through today. How many, again, it's just another looking at the cumulative number of sales so far this year, 377,000, better than any year apart from the 2 COVID years. I think that's what I think that's taking 1 week against 1 week is a reasonable comparison, but looking at it cumulative for the year to date gives us a more stable picture. But again, it is better than those 17, 18, 19, and of course a good 10% up on last year for gross sales. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
We discussed this before, didn't we, Anthony? The sale fall through rate. Obviously, once you've agreed a sale, quite a number of transactions fall. And you have a stat on this, don't you? What the long-term average is?
Yeah, the long-term average is 25%. So on average, 25%. 1 in 4 of those transactions won't complete, and that's for a whole host of reasons, from not being able to secure a mortgage, but also just people changing their mind. So especially in the existing homes or the second-hand market, you see one place, you put an offer on it. As our legal system, as you're talking to lawyers, know better than I do, very different to the situation in Scotland where your kind of offer is binding. If you do happen to see a house you prefer, you can just pull out with no real consequences, and that's what we see. That's what we see.
So obviously the rate has fallen for much of this year to almost below 20%, although in the last couple of weeks we've seen that little rise. In the last, you can see, I don't know what you can see my mouse here, but in the last couple of weeks, it just seemed to have ticked up a little bit towards 21, 22%. So again, that's another thing to keep an eye on, whether that rises back to your 25% average.
Yeah. But yeah, still below average at the moment.
Okay. And actually, this is Chris's final slide here, but it backs up your 24.28% 7-year weekly average of fall throughs. So what you know is for all those memorandums that fall on your desk, lawyers, 24% of them are not going to complete. So one of the big questions lawyers have got to ask themselves, of course, is do they work on a no sale, no fee basis, or do they charge abortive fees for those 24%? Interesting conundrum, because you charge them a fee, they might be a little bit hacked off with you when they've got all the way through the transaction, and suddenly they're having to pay for something when they haven't even got the house. Is it better to charge 24% more in the first place and do it on a no sale, no fee basis? It's a call for each and every law firm, but it definitely is one that you can think about. You can see though, 2022 current fall through rate 22%, not bad. Finally, net sales. Now, I know a few agents are more interested in this because net sales are the number of gross sales agreed less the fall throughs, and so it gives you a real accurate understanding of what the pipeline is as we move forward. Anthony, do you want to talk the viewers through this graph?
Yeah, sure. So again, glad to see we've got 2020 and 2021 here. So again, broadly similar seasonal patterns throughout the year. Obviously, 2020, the yellow line, COVID, when essentially the housing market was shut for a few weeks. You can see that there, and then the speed at which it recovered, was really incredible. And in my mind, we really didn't need the stamp duty holiday that we had. You can see that yellow line and then the green line for 2021 when the stamp duty holiday was in kind of full swing impacts those markets. Interesting that so far this year we're kind of slightly below still 20% above 2023, which is good news, and above the average in 2017 to 2019, which is, I say, would be a normal market. So that to me suggests we're in a better than normal market at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Now then, I'm going to hand over completely to Anthony here. These are his slides, produced by the Royal Bank of Canada and Anthony himself. So I'll let you talk the viewers through them, Anthony.
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate lawyers aren't necessarily as interested in house prices as the kind of the public at large, but we like to talk about house prices. And what I like about this graph is the grey box there is kind of when we were in recession at the start of COVID, and then despite what everyone thought, COVID's bad, it was really good for house prices. And my takeaway from this slide is, we've got the Halifax, we've got the Land Registry, we've got the Nationwide, and we've got kind of the average of all of them there. It's just how stable house prices have been since the mini budget. So although interest rates have shot up, and transaction levels have been moving around, even today, the Nationwide was saying that although house prices have fallen by a small amount for the second month running, we're still only 4% below that peak in 2022. And I suppose I and others thought at the beginning of last year that we would see a bigger drop than that, and that just didn't happen. It seems that those COVID gains, that COVID equity, is actually kind of broadly locked into the housing market, which I think has surprised many people, including myself.
Okay, and you haven't made a Charlie out of yourself, then? Is that what you're trying to say? Oh, okay, sorry, I not wanted to comment on that one.
Okay. Well, one of the other commentators thinks that house prices would fall 30%.
Peak to trough, I think he's trying to say there. So 30% from the 290, you'd be down to, we'd be down here somewhere. We'd be off the chart. We're back to 2019 numbers. Not going to happen.
I mean, it's I guess some would argue everyone's right in the long run, but he won't be drawn on a date as to when that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, unless there's nuclear Armageddon, I can't see it happening anytime soon. Moving on.
Yeah, it's housing transactions. Again, I think this is a great chart. You can see the spikes are essentially stamp duty holiday ending. So it's a bit like when we're at school, we have that essay crisis. We don't really do anything, then we rush to beat the deadline. And you can see just what a mess it made of the housing market in 21-22. Those three spikes. So the original date, the last date, and the final, the extension. And then we see that drop in transactions following the mini budget. And we haven't got back to normal levels. You can see I mentioned earlier about how stable the market actually was 16, 17, 18, 19, apart from that one spike. Despite the fact we had Brexit, we had elections, we had all sorts going on, but the housing market was really, really stable. It did take COVID and stamp duty holidays to muck it up. But I think what this points to is that it's generally housing transactions that take the hit rather than house prices. So the talk this morning of first-time buyers finding it more difficult because mortgage rates going up and getting deposits, that just means they step away from the housing market, and it's only those people who are actually active in the housing market who affect the house prices. If I'm not thinking of buying for whatever reason, I can't afford it, I don't actually impact the house prices because I'm not an agent in the market. So that graph suggests to me that transactions are slightly lower than the longer term trends, but that's what's taking the hit rather than prices.
Okay. And of course, your graph ends here sort of mid-late July 2023, or maybe a little after that. So the stuff we were looking at earlier indicates that we're going to see a more positive rise in that.
Yeah, well, this is actually up to the last, because it's a long scale. So you see that uptick towards the end of the chart. So yeah, if you kind of zoomed in there, that kind of shows the, with graphs, it's all about where you start. Start the line as to what they show.
Just interesting going back here, if you look at this, 2006, 1.5 million transactions. Wow, that's nearly 20 years ago. A lot of people were watching today who probably weren't even at work at that time, or even born in some cases. But it just shows how busy it was, and all the technology, all the prop tech in the world, and we're still taking longer than we did in 2006. There you go.
So this is mortgage approvals, which is my absolute key lead indicator. A mortgage approval today typically leads to a housing transaction in kind of 3 to 4 months time, and you can see that is on an upward trend. And we had new data out yesterday, so it didn't make the cut for these slides, but it was up again slightly yesterday. So we've been on an increasing trend in mortgage approvals since, you can see there, since September last year. Yeah. And the latest Bank of England credit conditions survey, where they do a survey of all the lenders, they expect both mortgage availability to be higher in the coming quarter and application success to be higher in the coming quarter. And again, that graph shows that we're at a lower level. If you look at that January 19 to the start of COVID, we were kind of around the 65,000 mark. We're not quite there yet in terms of the averages, but we haven't seen the volatility that we saw during COVID.
And the other thing to feed into this as well is that banks are under much stricter regulation now about when they make offers. They have to have a headroom check on every single buyer, which makes it much more difficult to get a loan. So the chances of us falling back into the days of many hundreds of thousands of repossessions look pretty slim at the moment.
Yeah, so banks typically have to stress test 3 percentage points. So if you're getting a mortgage at 5%, they have to stress test at 8%. Could you afford the payments at 8%? So, although we've got this mortgage shock, as they call it, coming through with people coming off low fixed rates, the majority of people will have been stress tested for the current levels. Yeah. So that kind of works, and they have to take a view.
We're not going to 8% anytime soon, are we?
No. But as in, so that's, if you're today, you would be stress tested kind of for that sort of level, if you were a kind of a new purchaser. And have to take a 5-year view. And so essentially that means we've seen a huge increase in the number of 5-year fixed mortgages, because that's the easiest thing for the lenders to do.
Okay, let's move on. There's your longer term.
Yeah, so the longer term, so as you can see, we've never recovered in terms of mortgage approvals from the credit crunch, but partly that was because of the new mortgage market rules and regulations, which again, as I mentioned, have these stress tests in, and no more than 15% of mortgages in any one period can be above 4.5 times income. So that's kind of put some safety provisions in the mortgage market. And so you can see those new regulations came in March 2014. So you can see that from the 14 there, it's been very stable. And I think that's, credit to the regulators that's made a more...
Did I read over the weekend, I don't know whether you saw it, that there was a little talk of political parties, I don't know which one it was, coming under a little bit of pressure to perhaps loosen those regulations?
Yeah, I mean,
You wouldn't want to do it,
why? No, I wouldn't. I mean, they did take away one of the stress tests very recently in 22. They said, it's not, belt and braces, it's too much. And I thought, just at the point in time we really need them, surely they're not going to be taking them away. Yeah. But most lenders are being sensible and keeping them in, which I think is only right.
Sensible till they're not.
Well,
I remember the Northern Rock, but that's another story. Okay. Deposits.
Yeah, again, people say everyone's really cash strapped and can't afford to buy homes, but this is the average first time buyer deposit. First time buyer deposit, averaging £65,000, and
That's
so
enormous.
this kind of ties into my point that those who can't get on the ladder don't impact prices. It's a high bar these days to get on the housing ladder. I remember when I got on many years ago, I scrimped and saved for £10,000 deposit. That was 10% deposit at the time. That I struggle to think how I'd even get on the housing ladder
And
at the
that is the
moment.
problem for many young people today, isn't it? That's the real. But there's obviously enough people around with 60,000, presumably banker mum and dad.
Banker mum and dad is a huge part. I mean, in the quasi-official figures, broadly half of people say they've had help from banker mum and dad. My own view is it's much higher. Unless do you really want to disclose, if they don't ask, kind of thing. So I think it is probably a lot higher than the statistics
Bank
suggest.
of Colombia.
Yeah, and because if we go to the next slide, I think that hopefully it shows kind of why. Yeah, so here we go. So as you can see, for a long time now, so from around 2010, actually,
back over here, 29.
yeah, but as you can see, that it's pretty broadly been deposit as a percentage of gross income's been about 1 times gross
so
salary.
what you're saying is gross income has grown, but the deposits have grown, but gross income has grown. So as a percentage, it's been relatively stable. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. And what I'm saying is that basically people are, I mean, think about that, saving basically a year's headline salary. So what this is saying is if you earn £30,000, your deposit you're putting down is £30,000.
Wow.
And that's why I think the bank of mum and dad's much bigger than
and of course most people
think.
Get taxed. So if you earn 30,000, you come away with 20, don't you, or something?
No, exactly. And this is saying before tax, your headline, you're saving a whole salary before tax. And maybe I'm just not the best saver, but I would struggle to save to save that much.
I'm sure you're very thrifty. Okay, mortgage terms.
Yeah, so this is maybe one of the the hidden creeping issues of the housing market. Long gone are those average 25-year mortgage terms. When I was buying all those years ago, it was 3 times income. Or 2.5 times joint income, and the standard was a 25-year mortgage. And you can see that that's just been creeping up and up and up and up. And we're now, as you can see, over 30 years is the average term. Now, bearing in mind, average first-time buyer age is growing up. We're at the point now where people are paying mortgages without the help of inheritance, into what would have been called the retirement years, so into their kind of mid to late 60s. So, are we just going to be working for longer? Who knows?
Possibly. One thing I think, I was interested by this graph. Back in the 2000s and in the 1990s, the majority of mortgages weren't repayment mortgages. They were all interest only, backed by either pensions or endowments.
Yeah.
Now, they don't do it that way. But of course, if we return to those days, those endowment policies, when they grow ahead of inflation, which in generally they did, or pension policies, or today it would probably be an ISA, may be well the way to go, because it doesn't matter about the term then, does it? Once your endowment hits the value you need, with a bit of help from your mates in Royal Bank of Canada.
I think, the problem, so over, I think it's pretty much 100%. I mean, it's not quite 100%, but it's definitely more than 97% of mortgages are repayment mortgages.
Didn't used to be that way though, did it?
No. It used to. So essentially, brief history lesson on endowment mortgages. So they originally came about for people who were kind of asset rich, cash poor. So let's say you're landed gentry, and you've got the big family house, but the cash the cash flow is not there. And so a bank would say, okay, well, in this situation, we'll take into account, because you're going to be able to, we know you're going to get those assets So just pay the interest, and then we'll take, because you've got these other sources of wealth which you can dip into to pay the principal sum. And so that's how endowment policies were used. It was for those who had independent wealth that they could realise to pay the principal. Obviously, interest-only mortgage payments are lower than a repayment mortgage, because you're not actually repaying, you're not actually buying the house, you're just paying the interest on the loan. And so mortgage advisors thought, oh, hang on a minute, this is a way to help people borrow more money, because the repayments are lower. And then your point you mentioned, Richard, that, well, hang on a minute, how are you going to pay for the house if you haven't got this independent wealth? Oh, we'll have this thing called the endowment where we invest, and those investments will grow ahead of the mortgage and pay it off. And maybe yours did very well, but overall they didn't work, which is why we don't see them anymore, because people are getting to the end of their term or nearing the end of their term, and it's like, my endowment's worth 60,000, but the principal is worth 100,000. What am I going to do? So people had to increase their mortgage payments significantly, and so the Bank of England and the regulators said, hang on a minute, this is silly, right? There is a way that we can make sure that people can afford to pay their mortgages and pay it off, and that's called a repayment mortgage. And then the next thing that got misused was the self-certification mortgages, which were originally just for self-employed people. And again, certain mortgage advisors were saying, oh, you can use a self-cert mortgage even if you're in employment, because it helps you get a higher mortgage. And so it's that misuse of mortgage products that led to the increase in regulation. So now your standard mortgage product is a 5-year fix
on a repayment basis.
Yeah.
And this is the most complicated graph I've seen. I'm letting you explain this one.
Yeah, this is my. I'm that sad. I have a favourite chart. This is my favourite chart, and it's good that you say it's difficult to understand, because that, in some senses, that's the point, right? So what it shows is bank rate, which is a proxy for mortgage rates, across the bottom, and then the number of first-time buyer transactions on the side going up. And my take on this is there's no pattern, right? It's just white noise, just random dots everywhere. And so my take on this is there's no correlation between high interest rates and the number of first-time buyers. So you can see that
all these
bank
dots
rate
over
of
here,
10.
the rates of 40.
Yeah,
what does each dot equate to?
So that's the rate and the number of first-time buyer transactions. So if you go to straight up from 10 to that point, the dot at the top, you can see when the bank rate was 10%, there was over 160,000 first-time buyer transactions. Whereas when the rate was just under 4, there was only 40,000. So it shows that we can't just think, the media just says, oh, high interest rates bad. It's not necessarily the case. And what house builders will tell you is that if you want to move, prepared to move, can afford to move, all the interest rate or the mortgage rate does is decide how big and where the house is. So you might buy a smaller house, you might buy, a couple of miles further outside of town, but generally, if people need to move and can afford to move, they do move, and the interest rate decides how big a house they buy.
Okay.
And, if I want to get really geeky on this, the R squared is the correlation, which is very low, 6%, very low. But even that R squared is the actual relationship. If you want to force a relationship on that chart, is that the higher the bank rate, the higher the number of first-time buyer transactions.
Wow.
But I say, my real takeaway is that they're completely uncorrelated.
Okay, which you wouldn't expect. Right, we're going to have to move on a little bit quicker, so I'm going to start rattling through these a little bit. So we then move on to the stats that 20 conveyor providers from the world of conveyancing. And the good news is that they've updated these, so we're now looking at data this month to the end of December 2023. Previously it was to September 23, so we've got some new data to show you. First thing to say, 613,000 transactions last year excludes new builds. I have to keep giving that as a caveat. It excludes new builds, which was actually quite a bit down on the September number, because September 2023 included October, November, December of 2022, where the actual number of transactions was good, even though we had because they'd started prior to that before the mini budget. So the mini budget did have an effect on the overall effect in 2023, and it came the total transaction numbers in 2023, 613, 618 without new build, quite low. Average house sale price, and there's a typo here, I do apologise, that should say 350,714, which is just a little bit down, which is 30, so it's £5,000 down on the previous quarter, and that's what we've seen reporting, I think, in the Nationwide today, where the house prices have dipped a little bit. Leasehold sales pretty much stable, 23% of the total are leasehold. The great news is the average time to complete has dropped from 117 days in September to 113 days by the end of December. So that is well done to all the conveyancers out there. I hope it's that you're all improving your systems, but I suspect really it's just that there's less work in the system, giving you more time to do things, which is good news. 113 days as an average, and it does vary from one place to another, from one law firm to another. And then the final stat that we always show is the time from completion to the time it takes you to get those applications into the land registry. The current average is 19 days, again, down from 21, which is probably a reflection of law firms having a little bit more time. So if you're trying to benchmark yourselves, 19 days for getting your things into the land registry, 113 days as time to complete. Those are the averages, but then we can go on and look at individual firms. So please feel free to interrupt me if you see something interesting here that you want to, Anthony, while I rattle through these last few slides. These are the largest firms by number of completion. So I say top, and what I actually mean is largest. There's a caveat here. We have taken out, as we did last month, the PE-backed firms, so people like Simplify and O'Neill Patient, and we've also taken out of this equation the consultancy firms like Taylor Rose and Setfords, because they're really like a thousand little one-man band firms, not the largest firms. They're just consolidating all those numbers together. Our target audience, and for most of you watching today, you're big regional law firms or even small law firms, I don't really mind, and you're competing against each other. We're not really competing against these huge conglomerates with multi-million pounds of private equity investing in them. So I'm trying to compare apples with apples. So of the largest firms, you can see that those are the market share. The top 20 firms had a combined 57,000, which was a couple of thousand down on the previous quarter. And you can see those names here. The only new name in it, which I hadn't seen before, a firm called Switch. I haven't come across them before, but they were new to this compared with last quarter. So again, what we're looking at here is those top 20 firms, or the largest 20 firms. They had a 10%, well, 9.34% market share, and you can see the names of those firms who made up that 9.34% market share there. I think this graph, and I'll let you comment on this one, perhaps, Anthony, is stresses that point even further. So what we're saying is the largest 10 firms had 6%, the next 20 firms had 7% of the market, and the next 70 firms had 13. So the largest 100 firms made up 26% of the total market. Then there's 4,234 firms that do the other 74%. What do you think of that, Anthony?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? When I was working on the IPO, and we brought to the stock market countrywide, and we were looking at the conveyancing market. Yeah, the number of conveyancers who are essentially high street solicitors, who do one or two a month, or one or two a quarter conveyancing jobs. I just think, for specialist conveyancing firms, there's a huge opportunity to take market share here, because you've got to be better at doing them. Right? If your main business is doing conveyancing versus the solicitor who's doing one or two a month, along with kind of wills and trusts and conveyancing, your systems have got to be better. You're going to be just much quicker at it. I think there's a huge opportunity for the specialist firms to take market share,
to improve, to become a bit better. If you become too big and become too backed by PE, the dial goes in the other direction. I know I've taken some of those stats, those firms out of my stats, but they're not so great for times to complete and everything else, because they're exposed to too many things like IT attacks and God knows what else, really. This graph, again, looking at the time to complete, this is for leasehold transactions. Everyone thinks leasehold transactions take a lot longer, and I understand why they would say that, and in many cases they are correct. So what we've done here is look at the 10 largest firms who do the most leasehold transactions. Connect to Law, I think they're not known by the name Move. They do the most leasehold transactions of anyone. Davison's do the next, etc., etc. But look at the times to complete in orange. Garvin's here, third biggest firm in terms of leasehold transactions. Their time to complete 113 days or thereabouts, which is excellent. I mean, that is truly, that's almost as quick as the average firm does a freehold transaction. At the other end of this scale, Convey Law, a large firm, often known as a factory, their time to complete on leaseholds 133 days. That's a heck of a difference between Garvin's and Convey Law. You're talking a good 20 odd days. Okay, by the way, one caveat here. This is 20 years data, not mine. Now then, moving on, time to complete the largest firms and comparing it where we were 3 months ago. I did say earlier it had come down, and it has. Okay, the average across the whole market is 113 days. The average across the top 150 firms is 114 days. And let's just look at some of our largest firms. So Garvin's, currently 3 days quicker than they were 3 months ago. Davison's, they've managed to knock 5 days off. Connect to Law have knocked 2 days off. Talbot's 2 days off. Reed Roper Reed 1 day off. Convey Law 1 day off. JMW have knocked a day off. Everyone's doing okay, but just some better than others. Glover Priest have taken 3 days out of it. PCS knocked 7 days, a whole week. So really obviously getting their act together there, taking a whole week out of the transaction times. And Bishopgate's Law in London, where you would think there's lots of leasehold and they're doing lots of transactions, 4 days off, and that's a really good time, 115 for Bishopgate, as are all of these really. So let me just move on. Then looking at this, who's the fastest firms to get the stuff into the land registry? A whole different set of firms here. The average, again, remember, 21 days. The fastest, and let's give them a round of applause, MJP up in Norwich, 7 days. I know David up there, that's well done, pat on the back for you, mate. And look at some of the other names there, Bishopgate's Law, I think they're all worth a pat on the back, because lenders look at this and say, do we want you on our panel? And when we look at the firms that go bust, people like Alexander Grace, they were at like 65, 70 days at one point. We've still got a firm in that top 150 at 69 days though. So come on, you know who you are, pull your finger out. But a big round of applause to the rest of them. I'll give them a quick mention. TQ Property Lawyers, Let's Move Conveyancing, Hutchison Thomas, Q Law, Percy Hughes, Ives and Co, Nolders down in Cornwall, and Devonalds in Wales. You're obviously really organised, getting yourselves, getting all those completions into the land registry really quickly. Well done. And then just a last little look at, if we do these figures by house price, who are dealing with which firms are dealing with the higher value properties. Again, these are all tend to be southeast firms. So what you can say here is Streathers, is that how you say it? Adams K, TMW, they're dealing with relatively high. Streathers, for example, their average house price, I'm guessing you're a London firm or certainly a southeast firm, of over £900,000. And yet your time to complete in blue is about 116 days. So it just shows higher house prices don't necessarily mean slower transactions. Okay, so well done to Streathers and to all the firms on here. Position yourself as the firms who deal with the higher value transactions. Okay, now each month, and I did say we promoted this, we take a look at a particular area of the country, and this week we have focused on the Lancashire town of Preston. Preston, if you don't know, is situated between Blackpool and Blackburn, and a traditional, I think it was a mill town back in its day, cotton town, and has a vibrant housing market, and I think, Anthony, you've said before on many occasions that the housing market, we look at averages, but actually it's made up of lots and lots of little markets, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thousands of tiny markets. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as an example, I live in North London. I don't live in Preston. What's happening in North London is of no interest to the people of Preston, I imagine, in terms of house prices. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's all about local markets.
Okay, so we'll have a little look at the data for Preston. I've widened it out in the first instance to look at the northwest. And here you can see, again, this is live data from 20 Convey, and you can see exactly what we're seeing here. So we're looking only northwest. So the key issues here: average house price 228,000 in the northwest of England. What's the average house price in northwest London, Anthony? What would that buy
Well,
you?
yeah, northwest London. So the average house price, the average house price in Islington is over 600,000, and that
Okay,
will get you a one bed flat.
so 228 would get you a kennel.
Whenever I see stats like this, I always get house price envy.
Move north is what we say. No. Okay, but equally down here you can see which firms did the most work. Now the interesting one here is My Home Move. I'm going to give it a mention here. Okay, you can see the pink line for My Home Move has been coming down and down and down. They're still the largest firm over the whole period, but it has been dropping. I think that is directly as a result of the fact, and we're not going to focus on purple bricks today, but as a result of purple bricks decline over the last 12 months in 2023, that hit My Home Move the hardest because they're probably their biggest introducer of work. Outside of them, big hello to Watson Ramsbottom, to my friend and colleague Elton. I hope your football team stays up this weekend. But Elton Ashworth at Watson Ramsbottom obviously doing a fabulous job over there, because you've got your firm, and what colour are you, Elton? The lighter pink, growing market share in the northwest with an enormous 1,200 transactions, which is really, really good. But notice, even though Elton's the biggest firm, he hasn't really got a dominant market share in the northwest. It's 1.5%. It's tiny. Plenty of opportunity for others to catch him up. I've got to move on. Okay, looking at that data in a bit more detail, you can, and this is the real power of 20 Convey data, and let me show you some of the stats on here. So if we use Elton as an example, he had 1,200 completions in the northwest, which is 1.5% market share. His average price was 202,000, a little below. It's about average for the whole of the northwest was 228, but he was at 202. So obviously Blackburn and Darwin, where you're based, is slightly cheaper. 42% of your stuff was leasehold though, so that's interesting. And the same for Naptons, and we know Naptons. I'm going to focus on Naptons in a minute. I know Sarah Barnes has said she doesn't mind us using her data today. So Sarah Barnes just slightly behind, chasing Elton really hard. Preston's obviously a little bit more wealthy because your average price is 239 compared to Elton's 202. Slightly less leasehold, 28%. But here are the key numbers. Elton, look at your time to complete, 103 days is absolutely brilliant. It's great from Naptons as well, below the industry average of 113 for this month, remember. In fact, a lot of these firms are below. Not all of them are below that. 120, I'm not going to mention the firm at the top. Time to complete for post-completion, Elton 27, that's a bit above average, 27. Who's the best here? Give them a shout. It would be Vincent's List. I think they're in Blackpool. So this shows the power of the data and how you can benchmark yourself across other firms. Okay, again, looking at Naptons in particular, thank you, Sarah, for allowing us to do this. Okay, your firm, 59th rank in the whole country. So what that's saying is that Naptons do more conveyancing than 4,500 firms other than 59 or above her, but that's pretty good stuff. Sarah's average time to complete, 110 days. That's excellent and below the industry at the national average. Your average completion price, 261. But you can see you do most of your stuff in the northwest and little bits all over the country. Okay. One thing I did want to point out on this graph, actually, look at this for Sarah's market share. She was going along really, really nicely until November. Okay, and suddenly it dropped off a cliff. Now, there's a very, very specific reason behind that, and it's nothing to do with Sarah or Naptons, the good people there. It was to do with the fact, I believe, that they were hit by this cyber attack that affected CTS. CTS, as many of you know, were a web hosting company that hosted many people's servers. And because their systems went down in November, December last year, that must have been a really tough time for some firms. They couldn't get the completions sorted out, and therefore you saw this huge drop off. So cyber security is still one of the biggest problems. And look how this graph shows that so clearly. And then finally, our final graph for today, again focusing on Preston, and I've picked up the PR postcodes, shows all the estate agents who are the main players in Preston. So you can see in black here, I think that's Dewhurst Homes. You've had a growing market share, and you maintain that, although you're being chased hard by Ben Rose estate agents. So if you are a law firm in the Northwest or in and around Preston like Naptons, these are the agents who are doing all the work. This is where you need to be focusing your attention, and maybe helping them out with things like compliance and completing these new Tier 6 forms. These are the key agents who you need to work with, and having 20CI data helps you focus in on that. Okay, Anthony, any comments on any of that? Or on the market in general? Because I think we've come to the end.
I don't think I can add to your whistle stop tour of the Preston and other markets. It's fascinating, isn't it? See the different prices and how, as you say, that scary cyber attack, how that can impact the whole of a kind of a housing market.
Yeah. And it wasn't just Naptons that got, there's firms all over the country that got dragged down by that. So keep an eye on your security people. And that, my friends, is all we have time for today. Thank you very much to Anthony for joining us. I hope you'll be back soon. You've done brilliant. Will you come back and join us again in the future?
If your listeners would have me, of course.
I'm sure they will. Thank you all. Have a great May ahead, a good bank holiday weekend coming up, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.